And welcome to our live stream on the Wednesday after the Mexican Grand Prix. What a race that was. No doubt there'll be lots of chat about that. Looking forward to that. So welcome, wherever you are in the world, whatever time zone you're in. Glad you've joined us. And if you're watching this or listening to this retrospectively, welcome anyway, because I totally get that it's not always convenient for all of you to be chiming in on live streams. But for those of you that can, looking forward to going through your questions in YouTube chat. As ever, should be a lot of fun. I've just had this in the post. I'd like to thank the Gerard family very much for this. This is a book about Bob Gerard. It's quite interesting, actually. If you go to the other side, it's the same cover. Very impressive, a bit like the Japanese. Well, the Japanese, because they start at the back, of course, and go forwards. But yeah, on Bob Gerard, who, and I think this is because I mentioned Bob, the great Bob Gerard, in a live stream about a month ago now. That's the gentleman there on the left. It's my mum behind him, actually. This is Snetterton 67, freezing cold early. Well, it's not freezing cold, actually. The sun's out. But it was definitely early May. Amazing. No, it's probably late April, 67. And I dragged my mum up to Snetterton because I just wanted to see Snetterton. I'd never seen Snetterton before. Well, I was over from Australia, so I just wanted to see as much motor racing as I could. And it was an empty track, apart from these Bob Gerard Cooper, Formula 2 Coopers being tested. That's Richard Atwood with his hands on his hips. And that's Bob with the glasses. And I mentioned that at the time of the British Grand Prix this year because Bob was, of course, a racing driver in his own right. Very good, very quick. And finished sixth in the 1950 British Grand Prix, the first ever round of the Formula One World Championship. Not the first British driver home. That honour went to Reg Parnell, who was given a factory Alfetta for that race and did a very good job with it. But he was the first private entrant in his ERA, and that was Bob Gerard. Anyway, as a result of mentioning all that and just my amazing luck of being able to get a photograph of him at Snetterton 67, he later became a team owner, of course. I've just been sent this book, literally arrived in the post this morning, so very much looking forward to that. Anybody that, I'll put the details in description actually of it, if anybody wants to catch up with that. Anyway, let's get on with it now with no more ado of what we're doing. Let me see if I can sort myself out here. Yeah, here we go. First question is from Aaron. Hi Peter, why did it initially become mandatory for back markers to let the car behind pass? Given that, well, it's interesting to see, car performance is closer now. Is this rule more appropriate than ever, or could getting rid of blue flags still work? Well, I don't think there was ever a point when we didn't have blue flags. It's just that not many people obeyed the blue flags years ago. And that's why you've got these great wins by, say, Sterling Moss in Monaco 61, or James Hunt even in 76 Canadian Grand Prix, using the traffic, the back markers beautifully, effectively to hold off a quicker car. In the case of Moss, the Ferraris, the Sharknose Ferraris of Richie Ginther and Phil Hill. And in the case of James, I think it was Patrick Depailler in the six-wheel Tyrrell, who was really quick at that point. But James just perfectly positioned the back markers between him and Patrick at strategic points of the circuit, as did Sterling. And it was a real art. But it wasn't as if there were no blue flags. There were. It's just that they didn't obey them, and that was it. I think if you just continue... I used to be a flag marshal, as I think some of you know, at Warwick Farm, and I think if you continually disobeyed the blue, Jeff Sykes might... I don't think he would ever have disqualified you, but he might have given you a stern talking to after the race. Fair enough. But there was a moment... I have no idea when that moment was. When, let me think it through. It would have been, I mean, Enrique Bernoldi, who is currently a regular steward, is more famous for holding up David Coulthard for something like 3 laps around Monaco and costing him, in David's mind, the win. And I think it was after that they started to get a little bit more serious about back markers have to give way to the cars that are about to lap them. And then, of course, we got all the modern technology. And so I think it kind of changed in concert with the modern technology and the way we have the blue lights and the GPS and all the rest of it. And then, of course, the imposition of penalties for impeding another driver changed the face of the universe. And So therefore, yeah, that's probably the whole penalty impeding thing's been around for what, I don't know, a decade now, maybe less, 8 years, something like that. And you're right, you know, I go on about how we can say all we like about Max Verstappen or Lewis Hamilton, but they've never had to race cars with manual gear shift and a foot clutch as the way Ayrton Senna and all the drivers before Ayrton had to. So how can you compare them really across all these different eras if, for all we know, Max might have been a terrible gear changer. He might have gone through every dog ring in the book if he had to make manual changes. I very much doubt it, because I imagine he's got incredible mechanical sympathy. But you see my point. We've never seen it. We've never known it. I doubt Max has ever driven a car with an H-pattern gear change and a foot clutch. So, and my point there is that this whole business of using the back markers is a lost art. And the fact that it was only really done well by great drivers is a reminder that it is all about visual positioning. It's also about having a proper homework and study of every driver on the grid and how he behaves and what he's likely to do or not likely to do, where he's likely to position the car at any given moment. That sort of knowledge was very, very important. And that won, in a way, that won Carlos Reutemann the 78 British Grand Prix at Brands Hatch when he was chasing Niki Lauda, Niki in the Brabham Alpha, Carlos in the Ferrari T3. And they came up to lap Bruno Giacomelli in the McLaren at Clearways. And Carlos, if you're in front, it's slightly more difficult because you've got to make your choice. And if it's the wrong choice, you're in trouble. But Carlos, I remember talking to Carlos after the race, and he was saying, oh yeah, it was Bruno. I had a pretty good feel for what Bruno was going to do. And I already had the car down the inside ready to go. And he did. And he won the race as a result, much to Niki's chagrin. So yeah, and it is an art. And that understanding of other drivers and how they're going to behave has gone as well, because everybody takes it for granted if you're a quick driver in a quick car that everyone's going to move over for you. And so you don't have to do as much homework, which is a bit of a shame. And that's why we hear on the radio, it's a red car, blue car, it's the Red Bull, it's the Honda, it's the Mercedes, no idea which driver it was. What is that Red Bull doing there? So it's a bit of a shame, but that's just the march of time, I guess, isn't it? Right, next question, again from Aaron. How many of the 19 other drivers do you think would have held the slide Max had in turn 1, lap 1 in Mexico? Well, it begs the question, of course, is whether Joss has let Max out in his Rally 2 Skoda or not to do a bit of grass hopping in the way that he did. I'm not sure Max needs that much practice to hold the slide that he did into turn 1, but I suspect Max has been out in that Rally 2 Skoda and had some fun. Why wouldn't he? Handbrake turns here, left, right and centre, airstrip somewhere. Wouldn't be on a public road. Airstrip somewhere, plenty of rain in that part of Europe, I think, in the Genk area. And have some fun in the Rally 2 car. All good for honing your skills if you've got an incident like the one on the turn 1 in Mexico. So yeah, I mean, Max was, what he did so well there was just keep everything as straight as he could at any given moment. There was no attempt to put too much load on the car than it could take. Lance Stroll trying to get back onto the track, Brazilian Grand Prix into the gravel, please note, and he just never loaded the car up at any moment and just kept everything very light and delicate, which is the way he drives anyway. So yeah, well. User QH9 to 4FY9B. Well, there's an easy name that rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Hi, Peter. Please explain what caused the Mexican Grand Prix to be so exciting, whereas usually it's a bore fest. Love your channel. Well, yeah, I mean, I was ready with the old Doc Martin reruns to, to sort of pass the time when it was getting pretty boring in the race, but none of that. And I think it was because, let me think why it was. Well, for all the criticism Pirelli get, actually, it worked out pretty well, didn't it? It was 2 stops against 1 was pretty close. And whether you went medium soft or soft medium was pretty close, as we saw. And I think because those 2 factors came in together, and it wasn't everybody had to do a 1 stop, or the medium tyre was useless, or the soft tyre was useless, or whatever. I think because that happened, we had some really good racing. I say racing in the true sense of the word. It doesn't necessarily imply overtaking. It means cat and mouse, it means defense, it means attack, and it means passing, not necessarily with the aid of DRS as well. I mean, the opportune passing by Oliver Behrman was superb to watch. you know, who cares if they were factory Mercedes? Here I am, I'm off. That's my teammate from ART. Yeah, bye-bye. And yeah, good luck to him. No mistakes under pressure at the end as well, which, you know, he's shown that before. He's shown that resilience before, so no surprise. But, you know, Ollie Berman, good example. And then the chase between Charles and Max. And I think that was very well covered, I guess. I mean, I'm not biased is the wrong word. I'm slightly talking sideways because I was watching the whole thing from Max's onboard. And so I was living every lap of that chase. And I'm not sure how much of that was actually shown on the world feed, but I suspect quite a lot of it. And that was just gripping, because when it's 0.8 a second a lap, but there's a chance the soft tires are going to fall off the cliff because nobody really knew, then, you know, that is captivating television, and it was just superb. But I think it was just that all those two things chimed in together, that 2-stop versus 1-stop and the medium and the soft. So let's have more of that, please. Pirelli. Who needs the hard, you know, 2 compounds. Luz Koya, 1803. Hi Peter, in Formula One history, was there a time when a car was downgraded in secrecy to benefit one driver over another? The implication being this is what McLaren have been doing to help Lando Norris and to obfuscate Oscar Piastri. Not downgraded in secrecy. About the nearest I can ever think of is going back to the early 60s when Colin Chapman had a very good year in 60 and 61. He'd won his first Grand Prix, and then Innes Ireland finished the 61 season winning the US Grand Prix in a Lotus 21, and Colin was out there selling the new Formula One Lotus 24 as the big new thing, the step forward with the Climax V8 engine, and it was definitely the way to go. And he had quite a lot of customers. And then, but he kept very secret the reality of designing and developing the monocoque chassis Lotus 25, which the millisecond it appeared at the Dutch Grand Prix 62 was just rendered everything else obsolete. Hang on, I've got a low battery sign here. Let me see why that is. Should be charging. Oh, it's charging. It just wasn't in the thing. Sorry about that. Hopefully it's gone red, but hopefully it's not going to give up on me, and it is still going to charge. There's always something, isn't there? Keeps me awake, keeps me alive, put it that way. And so I think when that happened, you know, all those customers thought, well, thanks for letting us know about Lotus 25, Colin. Not quite the same, obviously, within a team, and very difficult to do it within a team. I can't recall a situation within a team where one half of the garage was kept in complete secrecy about developments or set up on the other car to the benefit of that driver. There are plenty of drivers who've complained about that. Relatively recently, Fernando Alonso complained a lot about his 2007 year at McLaren when he felt he wasn't given the treatment that Lewis had. Nelson Piquet complained endlessly about the Williams Hondas, two Williams Hondas not being as good as Nigel Mansell's single Williams Honda, because Nelson had the spare car as well, and he never gave up on that. You know, the only way he could rationalise Nigel beating him was that Nigel had a better car. But of course, when you get down to reality, and you say, well, how did he have a better car? What did they do? And actually, to Nelson's defence, Nigel did the same thing at Ferrari. The minute Prost went well at Ferrari, it had to be because there was some, you know, skullduggery going on around his car. It's no longer red. It's charging. That's good. So most of that's in the mind of the drivers concerned. So I can't remember, and I can't recall a real situation of any race team really compromising either car, other than with team orders in the race, or if they're short of budget, favouring obviously the quicker of the two drivers. And that's a logical thing with new bits on the car and all that stuff. That's completely logical. And there was many Formula One eras in which there wasn't enough money to do two identical cars. But we are in an era today where every team can prepare two identical cars, give or take the odd flaw or two, which may be a one-off for one of the two cars, but they tend to alternate new things. But overall, not enough to distinguish in the way the difference in speed is currently between Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. And I think what you're getting to, there is absolutely no way in my mind that Oscar could be being hampered by McLaren to the tune of half a second a lap. There's just no way. There may be situations where he doesn't have this bit or that bit, but it wouldn't make that much difference. So moving on swiftly, Lee Kambaga 6458. Hi Peter, what do you think Andrea Stella meant? This is the team principal of McLaren, when he said, now we can give Oscar the tools he needs to fight with Lando for the championship. He said this in the post-race interview. He said, we will do that to keep Max out of the fight, and it's only the McLaren drivers. Does this mean they know what Oscar needed on his car, but we're waiting for Lando to catch up, then address it? Well, if it was that, and he's actually admitting that, then that is a massive, well, it's just a huge thing. I can't imagine that that's what he meant by that, and that's what McLaren meant by that. I was actually having a look at what he did say, and not knowing your question was coming out. I was just having a look this morning, and I thought it might be interesting to put this out. And I was going to put this up for a different reason. This is Stella talking after the race. He says, there were also promising signs from Oscar's side today. He put up a good fight racing in traffic all afternoon and was able to add more tools to his toolbox by adopting some adjustments based on what we learned throughout the weekend in terms of driving the car quickly in those specific low grip conditions. Now, I mean, it may well be that people have gone on from that and said, oh, well, now they're going to give him those tools. He can go on and fight Lando. Why didn't they do that earlier? But the implication of what he's saying is that, this is why I was going to bring it up. The implication is that that Oscar hasn't been using the tools in low grip conditions as well as he should. And now in Mexico, finally, even though he wasn't in great shape, they got him to make a few adjustments, and he did respond, and they did pick up some speed, which didn't happen, say, in Singapore. That's, I think, what he's saying, which is that's quite unusual for anybody in his position to say that, because what he's basically saying is that Oscar Piastri has not been driving very well because something as basic as adjusting, diff settings and brake balance and all those things that can affect the low grip conditions, he hasn't been doing, which I find almost impossible to believe, given how good Oscar Piastri is and how well he's been driving all year. And it's not as if these last 4 races have included the first of the low grip conditions we've seen all year. So to me, that was a little bit of a cop-out thing, which is sort of saying, oh, well, we're now going to make sure that he fully understands how to use all the tools in the toolbox. Whatever that means, actually. Does that mean brake, clutch, throttle, or does that mean all the idiosyncratic stuff on the steering wheel? I mean, I presume it means the latter. But as I said to Cam on Monday, for me, the more Oscar goes down that path of tiny details, the more complicated it's going to be for him. He needs to think, I'm not racing Lando, I'm racing Max Verstappen, and I need to start feeling the surface of the road. I need to get rid of all the junk. I need to get rid of all the data, all the stuff, and just feel natural again and be Oscar Piastri. That's my opinion. And they may sort of pigeonhole him and nurse him into these different areas, but ultimately in doing that, you're restricting the natural way in which he drives. So to me, he would be, I'm just going to, move that question up a bit. It's not absolutely easy to see, is it? To me, that sort of comment, if I was Oscar and the team manager or the team principal was saying that, I would be thinking, right, in one ear and out the other. I'm not going to be, I don't want to be spoken about like that, because to imply that I haven't been able to use the tools in the car is ludicrous. But that's what they're doing. It's all about, I think he's lost a lot of, it's not lost confidence, because he's a very confident driver in his own ability. I think he's lost some enjoyment and pleasure in the racing. Baku, he kind of could put aside as a one-off, but then immediately going to Singapore and having that drama on the first corner at Singapore, I think that has definitely taken away a lot of the pleasure of racing for him, and he needs to regain that. And maybe he did in Mexico. Maybe he thought, wow, I'm on the charge here. Could have got Ollie Berman if there hadn't been the VSC, blah, blah, blah. Could have been on the, where could have been P4. But bottom line is he was unbelievably slow in qualifying, and that is not use of tools in the race. That is not understanding how to drive a car in low grip conditions, because he's on a brand new set of soft tires and he's got the car in peak performance condition, and the car is capable of doing, you know, the lap time that Lando did. And so that's nothing to do with anything Stella said in that comment. It's all to do with feeling the surface of the road and being a natural racing driver. Oscar's problem is not how he races. His problem is qualifying well, apart from Singapore, where he didn't race well, obviously, but that was the first corner really that did that. And so he needs to be thinking pace, pace, pace. And the only way that's going to come, in my opinion, is natural instinct and feel. It's not going to come from, you know, pigeonholing him into various ways of late turn in order to get a higher minimum speed, or this or that, or brake a bit earlier in order to get a wider entry into the next car. All that stuff, which they feed to Lando a lot, and he kind of responds to it. But to me, that means Lando's beatable, because, you know, if you have to start feeding that sort of information to the driver, compromise a little bit with the entry here, Lando, go a bit wider in order to have a higher minimum. All that stuff is, whoa, you know, that is not Max Verstappen territory. And that's good news for Oscar, because that means Lando's definitely beatable if he's having to, A, he's having to listen to that, and B, react to that, and C, if he's turning in wider and going quicker, there's something wrong anyway. So, you know, Oscar's got a big opportunity here to take advantage of that, and that was the most significant thing from his point of view, I think, from the weekend, how much sort of spoon feeding they were doing in Lando. Oscar, if you're listening, just drive naturally and enjoy your lap and enjoy racing, and put your brain in the zone where you are what you are, and this is what you've always wanted to do all your life. And don't think about the data, don't think about it too much, certainly don't think about Lando's telemetry, and just drive the lap. That's what I would be saying to him. Anyway, that's that. Sarosh Soman, Peter, qualifying lap. Leclerc turned in much earlier than Lando. He had the highest top speed, but still was able to turn the car in early. I'm assuming that the car was set up with low downforce. Continued. I wish he gets to drive a championship winning car, and then it'll be fascinating to see how he drives. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Ferrari was a quick car from Friday afternoon onwards in a straight line. It always had a 2 to 3 kilometer advantage, which may not sound like much, but over a long straight like that, it adds up, obviously, because they're in terminal velocity for quite a long time. It varies, of course, whether the DRS is open or not. And of course, the point about a short corner is not, oh, early turn in must be a short corner. The point is also you're extending the straight in front of you. So but to do that, you compromise at rotation. You do not worry about having a high minimum speed at rotation. You want to brake into that rotation point with the car already generating some lateral load, but it's enough to be able to still basically be flat on the throttle. And then you have to brake at a perfect rate and then come out of the brakes at a perfect rate against the increased steering load that you want in order to get the rotation. And then once you've got that rotation, you've got the car straighter, because you're not worried about minimum speed, than a guy who's coming in with a wider entry, getting on the power sooner, and he's still got load on the car as he's starting to accelerate. You've got the load out of the car, or pretty much out of the car. And that's why Leclerc's lap was as good as it was. It was a superb lap. Very, very good. As was Lewis's. You know, got to give Lewis credit here. And it was kind of lost with a ridiculous penalty, but Lewis did a good job too, I think. But Leclerc, yeah, absolute class lap that was. Just superb. And he drove beautifully in the race. And as I said before, as much as we can eulogize correctly about Max's drive and how well he drove that first stint on mediums, and how he extended that stint to the point that he got correctly into the red tyre delta in terms of its peak performance versus the guys he was racing against, then that was as good as it gets. But having said all of that, Charles Leclerc's defense, when another driver has lap after lap has been taking half a second a lap out of you, and you know from your pit wall, because they're not afraid of telling you that he's going to be right on you at the end of the race, that's a massive amount of pressure. And particularly if your tyres are going away every lap, as they were on Charles' car. There was nothing coming back from the mediums on his car. And to be as pin-sharp perfect as he was at high-speed braking, at about 200 miles an hour into turn one, without locking up, to the point where Max is sort of, I just couldn't do it because Charles was just perfect there. That was one of the best bits of driving I've seen all year. Just wonderful, I thought. And yeah, your finishing point, wouldn't it be great to see Charles in a championship winning car? Yeah, it would. Let's hope the Ferrari's not too bad next year. Hopefully they'll be a little bit more, together as a result of things starting to work for them in Austin and Mexico. How it goes in the remaining races, obviously we'll have to wait and see, but I don't think we should be holding our breath of Ferrari having a championship winning car next year. If Adrian had been there the last 12 months, as he has at Aston Martin, or 9 months, whatever it is, then I think we'd be feeling very bullish and buoyant about Ferrari next year. But at the moment, difficult to see how it's going to be. At the most, it's going to be 3 or 4 wins, I would have thought, just looking at the way Adrian normally does the job at Aston Martin. Soros again. Max, after qualifying, said that he was struggling with no grip, and it was obvious to see on the onboards. I had to watch the onboards twice to understand that he was struggling. Both he and Leclerc gives similar impressions when they drive fast. Bit difficult to understand from their onboards what the car is struggling. Well, that's right, because they both are what we call short corner drivers, but that doesn't necessarily just refer to the way they prescribe the corner. It also refers to their feel and their touch, and it refers to the sweet spot they're able to generate, because everything is done by manipulation. It's not done by reaction. And so they're manipulating a car into a load, into an angle, into a given throttle and brake position that is giving them always feedback on what the car's going to do next. And that's why both of them appear to have unbelievable car control. And that's why when Max had that moment in the middle of the fast S's and the car's jiggling all over the place, that he didn't do what a lot of drivers have done there and just lose the lot. It's because he's able to feel what's going to happen next, because of the way he's generating the load in the car, and he's driving on the surface of the road, even if he doesn't have grip. And he's feeling that. And yeah, and then the rate of input is the other thing. It's not just manipulation. It's that he's able to put in exactly the right amount of steering correction and exactly the right amount of throttle decrease at any given moment. Whether we're talking a trillisecond at very high speed, that's what he can do. And that's not even something you can practice, I don't think. That is something you're really born with, that rate of input, that feel for what the car is doing next. That's Ayrton Senna, that's Nigel Mansell, that's Jim Clark, that's Sterling Moss, that's Mario Andretti. That's all the great drivers. Michael Schumacher, Niki Lauda, Alan Prost, Fernando Alonso, and of course Max Verstappen. So yeah, just wonderful. Another one from you, from Soros. Ham looked quite good in his onboards, quite fluid, but not turning in early. He looks much more comfortable in the car, is able to find the sweet spot. I thought he looked a bit like Lando with his touch. Yeah, very similar to Lando now, Lando and Lewis. There was a time when Lewis was getting in a bit earlier than Lando. Well, a lot earlier than Lando. But now he's not. He's sort of Lando-esque and sort of Daniel Ricciardo-esque as well. Just on that edge of... He's got the smoothness and the touch and the suppleness and the rates of input all there. All that coordination is there, but he doesn't have enough confidence on the front. And it was interesting that Charles was relatively quick in both races, in Austin and Mexico, even though the Ferrari now has a dumber front, which is a bit more to Lewis's liking. But a lot of that, I think, is Charles' ability on the high-speed S's in Mexico, certainly, and in Austin, it was to do with his tire choice. So, I think Charles making good use of a difficult situation and bringing it to his own characteristics. But I think he kind of overperformed in Mexico, to be honest. I'm not sure the Ferrari was that good, as good as it looked. And that kind of showed, really, with the way Max was able to catch him towards the end. I made that point also in Austin, the way Lando caught Charles in the end. The Ferrari's still not a very good car, but they got away with it in Mexico, enhanced by their slight top speed advantage on a circuit where the straight is very long. And I think also in the thin air, it kind of neutralized Red Bull a bit, their battle with Red Bull. Red Bull were definitely hurt by the thin air and the aero package they've got, relatively speaking, losing its effectiveness compared with, say, McLaren. And because it just shows their aero package is more fragile. It's more to do with little things on the car that make it work when things are more or less right, but they got a pretty small operation window of that. Whereas, as predicted, Mexico, whether it's Mexico, Monaco, wherever, Singapore, McLaren are always going to have a pretty good car, and it showed there again. Everybody else struggled. They did not struggle generating efficient downforce in the thin air. Everybody else did, with the exception of Haas Ferrari, maybe. Abhishenkaranjan. Russell was so right. Max had no intention of making that turn one. He outbraked himself. He was always going to cut turn one. Max outwits the system so cleverly every time and gets away thanks to the FIA. Well, yeah, you say that. I mean, but as I said, you probably don't know or know the name Ian Botham, but whenever he was playing cricket, something always happened. Whether he was fielding, bowling or batting, something always happened involving Ian Botham, because he's larger than life and he was able to pick up a cricket match by the scruff of the neck and do with it what he wanted to. And Max is the same. He's a similar sort of person. I'm not saying he would have actually gone for a 3-car, 4-car pass if he made it the 4th car. But, there's a gap there and you go for it. That's what we all want to see racing drivers do, not all this after you, Claude stuff. And yeah, maybe you could argue that he should have got a penalty for that. But we've seen a lot of first corner skirmishes. Lando, Singapore, very good example. Oscar, Hungary last year, very good, another example, where nothing happens. And I don't think guys like Lando think, I don't think guys like Max think, oh, it's the first corner, no way I'm getting a penalty because they never do it on the first corner, I'm going to do whatever I want to do. He doesn't think like that, but once he'd realised that Charles was not going to give him room, and I think he made a mistake there. I mean, if it had been, as I said, if it had been Lewis there, I think he would have got away with it somehow. But with Charles up there, it was obvious Charles was going to squeeze him, and that's what we saw. But the minute that happened, he just focused 100% on making sure he got the right return to the track and did it in a way that he wouldn't get a penalty. What's wrong with that? He's good enough to be able to do that. But I have said that I think Max should have got a penalty for what happened with Russell later on in turn 4, between turn 4 and 5, when he just basically pushed Russell out, allowing Antonelli and Oliver Burman to get through. And that was all because he was trying to give the place back to Lewis, and then Lewis outbraked himself, and it became a total confusion. And I think there, he was very lucky not to get a penalty. He would have said, well, that was unfair. All I was trying to do was give the position back to Lewis. And how was I to know Lewis is going to outbrake himself? So it wouldn't have been that fair in that respect. But then equally, what is fair these days? The reality is a circuit like Mexico, and there are plenty of them on the Grand Prix calendar, invite all this sort of stuff. Because if you go off, you're not really going to hit anything. And if you're going to have those sorts of tracks everywhere, then expect more of what we saw in Mexico, because why not? You take the risk, and you then you tend to try and minimize the chance of getting a penalty if you can. If it was Baku with a wall on the outside, I'm not sure Max would have been where he was. Pretty logical. Or Monaco, they don't. So that's another story. If everybody wants to see a cessation of what Max did in Mexico in the first corner, then we should build brick walls around all the tracks. And I can tell you now, it won't happen anymore. Same gentleman. Clearly after the 2021 robbery, I presume you mean Abu Dhabi, nothing surprises me from the FIA. I know they're making Formula One a show rather than keeping it a sport, fair sport. They want to keep the title fight alive. How low can this sport go? I don't agree with that. I don't think the FIA are remotely interested in whether the title fight is alive or not. I think Liberty are a completely different thing. I think the FIA, by and large, do a pretty good job of administering the sport in a fairly objective way, and they're not in any way influenced by what is going on with the championship, or indeed with a race win. We saw that last year. George Russell wins the Belgian Grand Prix, but no, he's out. And so they're pretty remorseless like that. I think maybe what you meant there was liberty. And I still don't think that there's a lot of skullduggery going on there. I don't think there's any going on. I think it's all fairly above board. The question is how competent the FIA is. That's a different subject altogether, and how able they are to apply an objective ruling, and how well staffed and financed they are. And we saw in Mexico some incidents, or two incidents really. Well, no, one, I guess. The whole Liam Lawson confronting marshals on the track when he wasn't expecting them was completely, deplorable and should not happen. And what is the solution to that? Maybe the solution to that is to have a core of, 15, 20, 25, 30 professional marshals who go to every Grand Prix as part of the Grand Prix package, to work with the local marshals and to train them in advance and to make sure that that sort of thing that we saw in Mexico never happens again. The reason that doesn't happen is because the FIA would say, well, we don't have the budget for that. And then you have the question of how much money do you need in Formula One in order to look after the details? How much money do the teams need coming in from TV rights, from sponsorship? How much money does Liberty need coming in from the same thing? And that, in my opinion, a percentage of that total amount of money should be spent on better marshalling at all the races and having professional marshals. We've talked about this. I've been talking about having professional marshals who go from race to race in the same way as the scrutineers, the race team mechanics with the teams, everybody, part of the family should be going to every race. And I've been talking about that, since I was at Autocar in 1975. So, probably it's never going to change because everybody is so money conscious and penny pinching that they never want to spend money on something that doesn't directly influence their own bank account or performance level. And to do it on something as arbitrary as that is very difficult in Formula One, to persuade people to do that. But that's what needs to happen, in my opinion. We need to have professionals, more professionals there. And then you'll see a tighter administration of Formula One. Jez James 2415. Hi Peter, I don't quite understand as to why a race engineer like Mark Slade doesn't need to understand about short corners and long corners. Thanks. Well, I think he does. I don't ever remember Mark saying that. And indeed, when he was talking about the difference on a recent live stream between Kimi Raikkonen and Juan Pablo Montoya at McLaren, where he was an engineer, he was explaining the difference, and I think I said, well, there you are. There's the difference between long and short corners. And he said, oh yeah. But generically, overall, why do more drivers and engineers not think that way? I'll tell you why. Because they don't go out on the track and watch. They're too busy watching numbers and telemetry and the TV pictures on the pit wall or in the garage. How many, they never go out to watch. And the only way you're ever going to see the difference between Max Verstappen and Yuki Tsunoda in the way they drive, apart from obviously the telemetry, which Red Bull and probably others can get access to, but the only way you can see the difference between the digits, as Rob Wilson would say, would be to go out on the track and watch it and listen. And they never do. It's become a sort of fashionable thing, and it has been for a long time, not to go out on the track. And you're so busy, you're so important, you're so technically brilliant that you've got to be right where the car is, in the garage or on the pit wall with everybody else, doing your thing. So they don't see it. They understand it, but because they don't see it, they don't put a name on it like short corners or long corners. They may have other names for it, which kind of encompasses the difference between Max Verstappen and Yuki Tsunoda, but I doubt it actually. They probably describe it in such ways as, oh, Max has a softer touch here and his steering input is less at this point, and it's all tiny details. They're breaking the corner down to everything he's doing differently to Yuki, which of course doesn't help Yuki at all, because he then tries to do that at one part but not the other. It ends up in a mess. What they never do is, but I over the years, I've obviously done quite a lot of days with Rob Wilson in the Bruntingthorpe years, and I've got quite a lot of drivers that I've spoken to and encouraged them to go to see Rob, and they've gone. And then the next step is always Rob saying, look, it'd be really good to bring your race engineer along and have him sit in the back seat. I would say about 10% of the drivers manage to achieve that. And when they do, the engineer says, wow, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about now. And sometimes when a driver's got a particular issue, like let's say he's a little bit aggressive on the initial steering input. Let's say, I mean, Rob's always got to think gentle, firm, gentle, and then firm. But let's say he's doing a bit of that, and he progresses during the day, and he can see the advantage of being gentle, firm, rather than being too aggressive with the steering and what it's doing with the load of the car. And the driver's starting to feel that, and he's starting to go gentle, firm. And the driver's saying, "Wow, yeah, this is really good." Rob then encourages them to come up with a catchphrase that the engineer can use during actual practice or qualifying to remind the driver to do that. And that's a good example of how you can improve quite quickly if the engineer is on board. And Mark, to my mind, has always been on board because he's always understood the difference between Juan Pablo Montoya and Kimi Räikkönen, and he's absolutely right. And as a matter of interest, I played that section of the live stream to Rob the other day, and he said, "Oh yeah, absolutely beautifully put by Mark Slade. Perfect example of an engineer understanding the difference." And what he means there is a lot of engineers that wouldn't understand that difference, and that's because they don't go out and watch, or they're not racers, or they've never really tried racing themselves. I mean, to me, Tom McCullough is another. Jock Clear is another one that understand these things, but not many, because so many new engineers come into Formula One and they look at what their predecessors done and the way they were on the pit wall or in the garage and what they do back in the factory, that they just basically do the same thing. They never say, "Oh, by the way, here's my headset. I'm going out on the track now for half an hour to watch." "What are you doing? Why are you doing that?" "No, stay where you are." Never happened. I know Franz Tost used to go out. I used to see him quite a lot out on the track watching. I'm trying to think who else did. I think, didn't George Russell do a bit of watching in, I don't know, somewhere, maybe Austin somewhere at some point. I think when the car broke down, I think he watched. Ayrton used to do that as much as he could whenever he stopped out on the circuit. So did Nigel, so did Carlos. You know, anybody with a brain would always want to see what everybody else is doing and not to be curious. See, this is why I just don't understand it. You know, when there must have been a race this year when Yuki Tsunoda was not in the car. I can't remember where it was, but some young driver was in his car, or maybe it's coming up. When that happens, instead of being on the pit wall with a headset, he should be out on the track watching Max Verstappen in the same car that he races. Why wouldn't he be doing that? But they don't, because it's a fashionable thing to be seen in the pits. That's where the TV cameras are. Arshad Chowdhury. I'm going to say it correctly. Arshad Chowdhury. Very good. Sounds like a cricketer. Colin Cowdrey, actually, but no, not. I saw Colin Cowdrey batting. When I was at school in Sydney, we had a beautiful oval overlooking Sydney Harbour. And the MCC, as they were known then, the English cricket team, when the England cricket team, when they came out, used to practice in our nets. And I remember Colin Cowdrey there. Somebody was throwing balls at him, and he had his lovely flannels and the white shirt just rolled up to the elbows, none of this short sleeve stuff. The cap, the beautiful cap. And he was just doing these unbelievably beautiful cover drives. Just perfect timing. Look, effortless cover drives off the willow. Anyway, what's that all about? Oh, yes. Hi, Mr. Windsor. How good modern drivers, Verstappen, Leclerc, Norris, Piastri, Russell, are in setting up their cars compared to older generations, Mansell, Prost, Senna, Schumi, Alonso, Hamill, Vettel? Is it mostly the engineers? Well, actually, to me, it's the great drivers are the drivers who know where they can compromise on the setup, what they can make up for, providing the engineer gives them the front end or the traction that they want. They'll live with the other stuff. That's the great drivers. The slightly lesser good drivers, still capable of winning Grand Prix, are the drivers that want the car to be comfortable to drive. And whether that means they want a bit of understeer so that they're pretty safe going into the corner and they don't want any instability at the rear because that's a bit flick oversteery and they're not really in the mood for that. Or whether it means I just want to feel the rear, I just want to get on top of the rear, give me ability just to power slide the car a little bit and I can live with the front. Though the latter two, the engineers have always been able to set the cars up that way if that's what the drivers wanted, but it's not usually making the car quicker. The only way to make a car quicker is to recognize that no race car is perfect and that these are the areas in which you need to compromise in order to get the best lap time out of that car. And whenever you see a driver doing what Lando did at the weekend, or Michael used to do endlessly, or Jim Clark did, or Nigel Mansell has done many times, or Ayrton Senna has done many times, or Alan Prost, or any of the drivers you mentioned, Vettel, it's because they've got a certain level of confidence that's come from the performance of their car anyway. They are able to make those compromises, and 9 times out of 10 they deliver on what they say to the engineer. Don't worry about the understeer, I'll handle that, just give me traction. And that's what it's all about. So it's not just a question of all racing drivers are the same. Are the engineers doing a better job now in getting the cars set up, or a lesser job getting the cars set up? You have to look at all the differences between the drivers. And generally speaking, I don't think the engineers today do a better job than they did back in the 1960s. They've got more tools with which to play, but they've got more limitations in some respects as well. And sometimes the changes take 5 minutes that used to take 2.5 hours. So, springs or whatever. But in general, I think the relationship between the driver and the engineer is about this as it's always been. It's just a question of the great drivers knowing what they want and getting what they want after a bit of discussion with the engineers. Of course, everybody has to limit their horizons to the grip level that they've got. And finding more grip is part of that. Obviously, if you've got understeer and you put more front flap on, you're going to have more grip at the front. But that doesn't necessarily mean you've got a quicker lap time. And then there's the overall grip, which comes from aerodynamic efficiency as well, which needs to be borne into account. And if you know that you are starting the race with 20% less aero efficiency than a McLaren, you might want to set the car up with more top speed, for example. Not necessarily, but you might. Or you might want to give it more traction than you would normally would, because it might help you with an overtake. So all those things come into play as well, depending on where you are in the scale of overall aero efficiency. And that's not difficult to calculate. Never has been, really. I mean, if you were in a Brabham when Colin Chapman was inventing ground effect, you knew that Mario Andretti was going to have 40% more downforce than you. So you built that into what you were going to do, I guess. And it's the same today. They've got data that they can refer to in that respect, where you are in the overall picture of things. So it comes down to the brilliance of drivers who know exactly what they want and can convince engineers to give them that. I think we got a super chat somewhere. Let me just have a look. I was trying to look after our super chat guests, which is very kind of them to do that. One of the reasons for doing it is to make sure they get the question answered or addressed with them. I'm not sure I answer all of them, but anyway, here's the super chat from See What I See 101. That's a great name. Peter, who will have the quicker car in Brazil between McLaren and Red Bull, and why? Well, McLaren, because they've got more aero efficiency, as we saw in Mexico. And that's not to say they're going to win the Brazilian Grand Prix in the same fashion. I think it's a sort of circuit where Max can make up more than he could around Mexico. And I think it's also a circuit where the Red Bull's overall aero effectiveness and efficiency is going to be nearer than that of McLaren, maybe not far away from that of McLaren. I think in the thinner air was distinguished between how Red Bull have managed almost piecemeal to get almost to where McLaren are. But then when they got to the thin air, it showed up a few drafts and a few bits of turbulence, perhaps, and drag that they didn't show up at lower altitudes. But back in Brazil, I think they'll be more or less okay. I was trying to remember if Brazil's that high off sea level. I don't think it is. So I think they'll be okay. I mean, let's think about Brazil, because it's not the old Interlagos, sadly, where Max would just disappear if it was the old one. There's so many mega corners there. But let's think about mega corners. There's high-speed braking downhill into turn 1, the Senna curbs, where McLaren will be really good. There's no way Max can do much better. No way he'll be quicker than the McLarens on a quick lap through there. Down into that left-hander at the bottom of the hill, yes, Max can be very good there, I think. And that's a very good short corner for Max, because he'll be able to get in a bit earlier, get the car rotating, get a really good exit without having to worry too much about curbs and stuff on the outside, because he won't have too much load on the car. So that'll be a very good Max Verstappen corner. The blind right-hander will be another very good one for him. Then you've got the Mickey Mouse hairpins where he won't be able to beat the McLaren, I don't think. Down the hill towards the end of the lap, that left-hander's flat, but the next corner will be another Max Verstappen corner. So there's 2 corners really where Max will be able to do quite a lot, and that takes you all the way up the hill, and that'll help him maybe run a bit less wing than he might have to if he wasn't doing such a good job out of that tight left-hander onto the straight up the hill. So he won't be, in my opinion, he won't be far away from the McLarens. He'll be in a raceable position against the McLarens. I think Mercedes, I think George will be too. It's easy to say. Ferrari might struggle a bit more on the change of direction and all those corners at Interlagos, possibly. Easy to say that, but you kind of feel that way. But I think Max will be pretty near the McLarens in Interlagos. So thanks for that question. See what I see. Very, very good of you to do that. Back to where we were. Let's have a look. One last lap. This is Hola, Peter. Thank you for your insight to the world of Formula One. Thank you. Would you agree Oscar may feel deflated and demotivated given support and assistance Lando has been getting over the past month or two? Well, that's what it appears from our side of the fence. And I think he felt in Singapore that he was hard done by, and that McLaren allowed Lando to break an intra-team agreement and get away with it. And I think that's the first time that sort of thing's ever happened to him, and it's taken that, certainly coloured his race there. And I think he's been in a bit of a funk since then, and focusing more on what people are trying to say to him. Come on, you can do it. Don't worry about those guys. They're going to favour Lando, but you can do all that stuff. I think is probably bad stuff. I don't know how much he puts on the old headset and ignores it all, but I would have thought it'd be pretty difficult to ignore all of it, and therefore that's kind of penetrated his psyche, I guess. But I think Oscar's more deflated about going out and qualifying and doing what he feels is a pretty good job, and then realizing he's half a second slower than Lando. I think it's more that than thinking about the ways they're helping Lando. Well, it should be. And he should be then digging deep and thinking about his own driving and what he's doing, because it will not be helpful to Oscar, either from outside influence or in his own mind, to be thinking that they're giving Lando a better car. I personally don't think they are. I think he's got the same equipment at his disposal as Lando, and it's a question of driving it as well as Lando and getting the best from it. And yeah, he does slide a bit more than he used to. He's a bit more aggressive with the throttle and things like that than he used to be. He needs to get back to where he was. He was a very, very supple, precise driver when he first came to McLaren, and he's gradually become more and more loading up the car quite aggressively in a way that is now costing him time on low grip surfaces. So he needs to get back to being much more fingertippy, in my opinion. And he was there. It's not as if that's something he hasn't attained in the past. Edgar de Melendez. Thank you very much. He says, thank you very much, Peter. That's very kind. Thank you, mate. Mac 790. Hi, Peter. How would you describe Hadjar and the great Kimi in terms of style? Pure short corner like Max Leclerc, or hybrid style like Lewis? That's very good descriptions you've got there. Red Bull is saying Hadjar is the closest to Max they've had. Yeah, I to me, he's very good on short corners. He's very good on fast corners as well. I think that's the distinguishing difference between him and Antonelli. I think Antonelli's getting there, but it's a bit of an effort, and it's a bit of a oof, wow, he got through those S's all right, just. Whereas Hadjar, he's going to be on it, and he's very, very good. He's quite emotional. I think that's one big difference between him and Max, and that will show up. I'm imagining he's going to be alongside him next year. That will show up. Well, no, maybe, perhaps not. Perhaps Red Bull will get that out of him. And don't forget, Laurent Mekies is French, isn't he? So he will have a natural rapport with Isaac as well, and which he's already had from Racing Bulls. So that's a very good thing from Isaac's point of view. And he will only learn from Max because he's got a good brain, and he's departmentalized enough, as James Hunt would say, to be able to learn from Max while still being Isaac Hadjar, the racing driver. And I think he'll go really well. He'll be very good. I mean, he'll be alongside Max. If the Red Bull's a good car, Max and Hajar will not be that far apart in qualifying. And then he'll develop as time goes on. He'll become very, very good. How good the Red Bull will be, of course, is another matter with the Ford power unit. I hope it's going to be good. But you know, I still say, when you look at what Aston Martin have got with Andy Cowell and Adrian Newey, you know, it's hard to think about how Red Bull are going to dominate next year. So yeah, and I think I don't think Antonelli is as good as Hajar because he's not as good on fast corners, in my opinion. So somebody said, oh, you know, he's going to be Mercedes' future when George goes. Well, they need to. Well, if he is, I don't think he'd be as good as George, to be honest. So there you go. He's good. He's very good, Antonelli. He looks very good on slow corners, almost Hajar-like. But yeah, I would say Bortoleto is better on fast corners as well than Antonelli. Not saying much really. Everybody probably agrees with me on that one. I'm not sure Bortoletto's good on slow corners though as Antonelli. Yeah. So Luca Cambon, 2051. Hi Peter, thanks very much for your unique interactive show. Well, is it unique? I'm impressed that it is. Not impressed, I'm pleased that it is, because I quite like these things I can bring up on the screen. I don't think many people do that. The compromise, as with the setup of a car, is I can't see the whole chat as an entirety. I've got a very small, I've only got like 4 questions I can see here, but it seems to work okay and it looks pretty good. I think I'm very loath to want to change that. I'm being pushed in various directions to try and do that, but at the moment I think it's working well. Anyway, thank you very much. Why put the 2 cars on the same tyre when Lando and Oscar start so far apart on the grid? Nothing to gain from soft from 7th. Red Bull were on it. Well, yeah, I made that point in the video, and with Cameron again, you know, massive mistake from Oscar not to push to be on the medium tyre at the start. Why wouldn't he have done that? Whatever Lando was on, and obviously all the teams knew that it was close between the two. If you're going for a one-stop strategy, why wouldn't you do the opposite to Lando? How else is he going to beat Lando? If he runs the same tyres, all he's going to do is filter into the DRS train, and with luck, he might finish, you know, top 6 or something. But you know, and I don't think you can say, oh well, that's an example of McLaren favouring Lando. I find it impossible to believe that if Oscar had stamped his fist on the table and said, I want to start on mediums, I can't imagine that they wouldn't have said, oh, okay, all right, well, on your head be it, Oscar, whatever they wanted to say. I can't imagine they wouldn't have done that, because they would have thought, oh, well, kind of cool to have both cars on the same time. Having said all of that, I suppose they might have done it for the reason I said in the video, which was, imagine if Oscar had beaten Lando by starting on the medium tyre. Imagine the unrest that would have caused at McLaren politically, that the guy on the pole by half a second or whatever it was, has got beaten, well, compared with Oscar, has got beaten by Oscar because Oscar had a different tyre strategy. I think they wanted to avoid that at all costs. Maybe wrong, but I suspect they did. Rao 5160, what was the atmosphere like at Williams in the motorhome in the BMW era and the Nigel era? Well, I wasn't actually there in the BMW era. I left in 92, but I was close to the team then. I knew Mario Tyson pretty well, obviously Patrick and Frank very well, and actually I knew Ralf Schumacher very well, and well, not very well, pretty well, and Juan Pablo for that matter. So yeah, you know, there were a few bits of internal politics which I shouldn't go into here. It would be inappropriate to do so, but I think there was always a sort of iron curtain between Williams and BMW. And Franz Tost was involved with BMW then, and I remember Dickie was not very happy because or was it Gerhard Berger? One of the Gerhard Berger, I think it was. Yeah, sorry, I think it was Gerhard. Started giving Dickie a hard time about a water can in the back of the garage and why it was the wrong shade of BMW blue or something. You know, and Dickie was thinking, what's this all about? So there was a bit of that, but in general, I think BMW felt that inevitably they would buy Williams and turn it into a better race team, and they got increasingly fractious when it became clear that Frank was true to his word. In other words, I'm not selling my team to anyone. I'm the boss. I created this and I want to run it my way. And when that eventually became clear, that obviously the relationship did not go very far after that. So that was the main thing. But it was the Sam Michael era as well. And, you know, it was some of the cars were good, some were not so good. It was a bit of a messy time, really. There was Patrick not being Patrick anymore. That's what really is my recollection of that era, I think. So, yeah. Going back to the Renault one, the Williams era, well, the whole Nigel era you're talking about, obviously Honda and then Renault, was fabulous, because although Adrian Newey was there, back end of that era, of the Nigel era, if you like, for the 14A and 14B, Patrick was still very much Patrick, and he dovetailed really well with Adrian and allowed Adrian to get on with it. And Adrian had lots of respect for Patrick Head, so it worked really well. And then you had Paddy Lowe and Steve Lowe and all those guys, Steve Wise, doing the active ride. That was brilliant. And then back in the Honda days, the atmosphere was coloured completely by the friction between Nigel and Nelson, and indeed Nigel and Keke for that matter, and also between Williams and Honda. As much as, I mean, Frank was very close to Kawamoto and Nakamura. Nakamura was the head chief mechanic when Honda came into Formula One in the mid-60s, and then later on became a sort of advisor stroke right-hand man for Kawamoto, the head of the whole Honda thing, racing division. And Frank and Kawamoto got on very, very well. But then there were a lot of underlings who came into play, and they were new era Honda people that only saw things their way and had no ability to think as a race team owner would think. So when Frank said, yeah, of course you can wear the Honda caps on the podium, have the drivers and the Honda caps on the podium, they thought, yeah, Honda caps on podium. And Frank knew perfectly well that he'd signed a contract with Goodyear that they had to wear Goodyear caps on the podium. But, you know, we'll sort that out later on. So imagine what that friction was like. Endless. And so it went on. You know, there was a guy called Sakurai who was the head of Honda under Kawamoto, and he was very difficult. And then there was Noguchi, who was Sakurai's right-hand man, and he was even more difficult and read the contract to precise detail on everything. So he was always a drama. Goto-san was the engineer. He was great. Ichida-san was great too. He was the designer of the engine. So those guys were all good. But on the PR side, it was always terrible. I mean, a terrible relationship and atmosphere. And then between Nigel and Nelson, there was nothing there really, because Nelson always felt that Nigel was being favoured. That was the only reason he could be quick. And Nigel didn't really respect Nelson after Nelson had sort of been pretty critical of Nigel's family and his wife, and generally of him in general. So that didn't work either. But they never, you know, that didn't matter, because they were both out there racing as best they could, and Nigel did a really good job. Nelson on occasion did a very good job as well. Won the World Championship, as we know, in '87. So yeah, they were interesting times. I ought to write a book about them, I suppose. Anyway, the last one I remember was because a lot of my time then I was with Sheridan Thin, who is very like Sir Humphrey out of Yes Minister, and I was, you know, Bernard really to Sheridan Sir Humphrey. But I used to fire up Sheridan obviously a lot, and we got to the Japanese Grand Prix, and this was when the breakdown was really, you know, was happening, and obviously Honda were going to leave us and everything else. That they wanted Frank to run Nakajima and Nigel, and Frank never was going to do that. He never in a million years. Partly because he didn't want Nakajima, and partly because he didn't think Nigel was capable of winning a championship he didn't think Nigel was capable of winning a championship. He thought Nelson was a champion driver and Nigel wasn't. That's why he didn't run the Honda engines in '88. But anyway, I guess this was '87 Suzuka, and I'm walking down the back of the pits, up the hill towards the top of the pit lane, but I'm at the back of the pits. And Sakurai is walking towards me with his Honda shirt, and he's got 3 or 4 Honda minions around him. And I was just about to say something like, I think I was going to say something like, what a shame we're not doing the same roadshow thing we did in '86, winding him up a bit, knowing that he would never have done it because they were leaving us after that race, or 2 races later. And as I approached him, he went up and he went, like that with his hand, just, which was a Japanese way of saying. Wilfred Hyde White used to go like that, didn't he? When he wanted the people around him to disappear. I mean, he's wearing his white linen suit. He's just arrived in North Africa. He would go like that to the people, trying to sell him a necklace. And it was just a vague sort of royal thing. But Sakurai was, which was that, which was no doubt was the sword, you know, going across your neck. So that was the end of that one. But Sakurai was the guy actually that Ayrton became very close to and did the deal with. And then Ron went to Japan and met Sakurai and sort of did the deal with Sakurai, as he used to call him. Unlegendal. Hello, Peter. Hello, Freya. Hi, Peter. Oh, what has happened to Oscar's performance? Yeah, well, we've talked about quite a lot about that. I just think he's not enjoying his driving. That's no. I'm sure he is, and he's sure he goes to bed at night thinking, well, above all, you know, I'm a Grand Prix driver, and I shouldn't be complaining. I'm lucky to be where I am. But when I say he's not enjoying his driving, I'm saying that as a positive thing, as a way to get back into it. He needs to start having fun in the car again. That's what he needs to do, and not be so hamstrung by all the stuff that inevitably are thrown at you by engineers that want to throw stuff at you. I don't want to do that. I just want to go drive the car. Sorry, mate. Yeah, there we go. Dillstar, hello Peter. Completely lawless. Yeah, we've had you before completely, haven't we, Mr. Lawless? Did you see Nico, or maybe Miss Lawless, I don't know. Did you see Nico Rosberg's comments on Max winning the World Drivers' Championship and Lando being the weakest contender ever? No. If anything, Lando has found that rhythm he needed and Oscar's struggling. Going to be a great season. Well, I mean, I can't believe Nico Rosberg said that about Lando. He's a very intelligent guy, Nico, so for sure he was taken out of context. No way in the world would he have said that. And he thinks Max is going to win it. Well, yeah. I mean, I predicted at the start of the year that when pushed into a corner that it would be Max, but I'm nervous now. I'm going to start playing the Rob Walker game, which is to bet against yourself always, and then magically you go and win the race. And so look what happened. I said that didn't I? I said that after qualifying in the video. I said, you know, in terms of this championship being one where Max can maybe take it right to the end, it took a big hit today with him starting only P5. He needs to have perfect weekends in order to do that. But he still finished third. He could have been second. So if I say that more, maybe he's going to have even better results. And don't think I'm a massive Max above all others. I really respect Lando, I really respect Oscar, and I really respect Max. I just happen to think Max is the best driver. That's all. So, Zishan Nafsa, sorry. My pronunciation of your name's not very good, is it? Peter, do you think the Mexican Grand Prix will change now how Lewis deals with Leclerc on track? I don't think Lewis would be particularly annoyed with Leclerc, would he? From that race, I think he'd be thinking, if my race had gone differently, I could have been second in that race. Isn't that what you think? I drove well enough and I was quick enough to be right there, and very happy with the way I drove in qualifying. Bring on Interlagos, where I've been really good in the past, and I love the circuit. I think that's what he's thinking. I don't think there's any way he's changing the way of dealing with Leclerc. And he was right up there in prime position going into turn one, wasn't he? Leclerc was on the outside, he was on the inside. So, and he made a great start. I think he'd be quite happy, apart from the ridiculous penalty he got and the way the race worked out for him. I think he'd be quite happy with his own personal performance and not thinking about Leclerc. Or maybe I'm missing something there. Rao 5160, when you raced in Macau, was that the best track you'd driven? Well, from my brief experience, absolutely, no doubt at all. And I was lucky enough to talk through a lap of Macau with Ayrton. He just sat down and I put the recorder on and he talked me through a lap when I told him I was going to be racing there. And he spent about 20 minutes on it. And virtually everything he told me just came up straight away. And the manhole cover here, or the wall there, which is that height, everything was exactly as he said it. And I was lucky. I finished second, but it was a fabulous circuit because you've got that long straight, which is quite bumpy, and then a bumpy braking area into that turn one, and it's very wide on entry and very narrow on exit. So you've got to be really, really precise there, which was a great corner. And then up the hill, flat up the hill, and you get that blind brow, a bit like Monaco, left, right, and then down the hill. That was the only time in my very brief and not particularly good racing career where, for the first time, I kind of felt, sounds incredibly pretentious, I wasn't in the zone, but I was able to look at a point right at the bottom of the hill without really worrying what was happening either side of me, but I was correcting the car as it went over various rises and falls on the very quick S section down the hill, and it's an incredible feeling. It's like the first time you ever ride a motorbike and you lean over through some S's like that, and it's such a great feeling. And it was the first time I'd ever felt that going really quickly, where you're just going boom, 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 and yeah, it was wonderful. And then you got all that tight stuff, which I really enjoyed, and I love the hairpin as well. And then those fast corners on the seafront there, unbelievably quick, very wide track there when I was there, wide circuit, and not helped on lap 1 or lap 2, I think it was, by a photographer jumping off the wall in front of me and running to the other side of the track, and me just missing him. And I listened to the Chinese TV commentary afterwards, and it's unbelievable the decibel change as he sees this guy jumping off the wall. The only corner where I was completely useless, where Ayrton said, oh, it's easy flat, was the left-hand kink, which is where I think the pits are now, I'm not sure. But there's a left-hander. Let me get this right. What was it? No, there was a left-hander, that's right. Very, very fast left-hand kink before the right-hander onto the straight, the long straight. And that left-hand kink, I was never flat through there. I tried it once, had a massive moment, tried a couple of different things, could never get it flat, which was really annoying. That was the moment I thought, right, you're not going to be a racing driver, Peter. But I used to have a great time there. I shared a room with David Hunt, James's brother, when he was racing Formula 3 there, Ross Cheever, Stefan Johansson, Manuel Pirro. I used to have a real laugh there. It was brilliant. The Patsev, hello from Bulgaria, Peter. Love your analysis. Thank you. Thank you very much. Very kind. Best wishes to you in Bulgaria. Big Al Nowitzki. Hi, Peter. Not Formula 1 later, but I wanted to quickly ask, what is the best way to watch Rally? Is it through the Rally TV app? Yeah, it is. Rally TV is not expensive. You have to subscribe, but it's really good. I mean, they show all the stages live, and most of them are on board, so they have very good drone shots as well. There's a choice of commentary, which is good. I normally listen to the Japanese because it's the quietest and allows you to hear the co-driver the best. And you've got a lot of replays as well. You can watch whenever you want. There's also a thing called EWRC, which is also an amazing website. It's not a video thing, but it's an amazing website, which has, at the top, it's like a sort of, roll of honor, but it's actually all the events taking place on any given weekend. There's usually about, 20 rallies going on around the world. And it's got all of them. And you can, if you select on one rally, you can get to, you have then all these options: stages, itinerary, stage results, all the classes, weather, everything there. EWRC, just an amazing website, incredible detail. I actually tried to subscribe to it, which involved a bit of money, but it wouldn't accept it. So I just still use it for free, and it's everything I want it to be. It's just a fabulous thing. So if you want to watch rallying, you've got Rally TV, which works, I think it works globally, and you've got the EWRC. And between the two of them, you've got everything you need. Chowdhury again. When Max drives heavier race cars like the GT3, does he still prefer those to be oversteery? Well, he still prefers them to have a front end, is what it's all about. And if that means oversteer, instability at the rear, no problem. But what he wouldn't want with a big heavy car, or even a relatively light power to weight ratio speaking Formula 1 car, because they are heavy in their own right, he wouldn't want understeer. That's the point. Because with understeer, that's very difficult for him to do what he wants to do with the car. In other words, get into the corner, trade off the braking against increased steering load, slow rotation point, and then accelerate in a straight line. It's very difficult to do that with understeer. It's much easier to do that if you've got a good front end. And then if you're having to do, he can manipulate the instability at the rear with the way he's coming out of the brake pedal pressure against steering load. That's how he does it, and he knows he can do that. So he would always want to have a good front end. Heavy car, light car, 2-seater, 1-seater, whatever. Completely Lawless says, those marshals on track almost getting hit by Lawson was wild, especially in this era of safety. Well, yeah, actually, you know, for a guy who was at South Africa, sadly, in, was it 76 when we lost poor Tom Price? You know, it's one of my best friends in racing at the time, wonderful racing driver. Completely needless, pointless accident caused by an overzealous marshal. And still we got marshals on the track today. And we know, you know, obviously the Jules Bianchi accident was stuff on the track as well. And there shouldn't be any excuse for that. As I said earlier, for me, the FIA don't have enough people or enough money. And the teams and Liberty should be putting more into that, in having a professional team that go around and make sure these things never happen. Diego Marino says, hello from Mexico. Well, thank you very much, Diego. He sent an amazing number of photographs from Mexico. Thanks for those. Some lovely shots of the Honda. I guess it was well, they're remembering Richie Ginther's win of 65. First win for Honda, which was also the first win for Goodyear in Formula One. So it was a momentous occasion. Richie had led briefly a few Grand Prix. The Honda horizontally mounted V12 engine had shown its pace, and in the thin air there it disappeared. Everybody else had a few issues, but Richie Ginther and the Honda won that 65 Mexican Grand Prix, and it was well celebrated by Honda and by Formula One in the race this year. Although I understand the car didn't make the opening lap. I think that was the case. I may be wrong, but it doesn't matter, does it? I just want to hear it fire up. That's all you need. I love the way the Honda mechanics were all in the original 60s overalls, those striped overalls, and just great car. That I love that 65, and the 64 and 65 Hondas. Beautiful cars. They look like scale electric cars, really, didn't they? Big Al Nowitzki. Can you believe Oscar fans are trying to say they are purposely jeopardizing his car in favor of Lando? Why would they take points off him and give them to Max? Doesn't make sense. Well, yeah, and as I keep saying, there's no way any race team, regardless of points here, points there, there's no way any race team, the number of people that work, the guys and girls in the factory, the race team, the sponsorship, everything that's involved, the money involved, there's no way you would ever compromise the performance of either car by deliberately withholding some performance part on the car. There's no chance. It would never happen. It's too much at stake. McLaren know that. And if Oscar believes, like Nelson Piquet at Williams, or Fernando Alonso at McLaren against Lewis, if he really believes that McLaren are doing something to hurt his car, then it's going to be very difficult for him to become the Oscar that we know and love from the start of the year. What he's got to do is not even listen to that rubbish and just enjoy being a racing driver and enjoy every lap he drives and get his feel for driving back again, in my opinion, at this stage of the year. I mean, plenty of other things he could do if there was lots of time, but he doesn't have that. The best thing you do is just become very natural again. Zishan Zanafa. Peter, I saw in another video you highlighting the homework Max had been doing on the race runs at Mexico. What do you think McLaren? Why do you think McLaren drivers didn't? Well, they did a very long run on Friday. Lando did. But they didn't do, I think they felt on Saturday when Max took the trouble to do that second long run, which is what I'm talking about with the homework. I think it's because they were pretty happy with the way things were, and they just wanted to make sure that they got onto the front row of the grid with both cars. But it kind of worked, half worked. I think it just can only have been that. I mean, when Max was out running, let me have a look at my book, actually. Where is it? Here, I think. I just want to see what Lando was doing when Max was doing that long run. What he actually was doing. It's a good point, isn't it? Oh, it's not that book. Which book is it? Oh, this one. It's my Monza Autodromo notebook. There you go. Where are we? Q3. Verstappen is doing his long run. Yeah, Lando is just running mediums and just trying to get. He's running a little bit of. I don't think he's running fuel even. He's just getting set up right, ride heights, all those things. He's just working on tiny details, and not really bothering with fuel runs. It's very. Yeah, I mean it's a good question. You know, and I question whether they made a mistake there, because he was never pressed. But you know, had Max qualified on the front row, and was he running, and he chose to run medium soft, he probably wouldn't have. But had he chose to run that, he could have won that race. Actually, we just don't know. And I think, you know, full credit to Red Bull that even though they didn't have a car that was, they probably knew that, I guess, by close of play Friday, they didn't have the car that was ever going to be aerodynamically as efficient as the McLaren. They still went ahead and did their homework on the Saturday. Gino Moni's 1878. Hi, Peter. Gear shifting is not as hard as you make it to be. Also, there's a lot of talk about Senna, the best qualifier, but in the modern age, tire management is key, qualifying versus race setup. Gear shifting is not as hard as you make it to be. I've never said it was hard. I've just said it was different. And that coordination was highlighted by the difference in the drivers. Ayrton, silky smooth, incredible. Michele Alboreto, silky smooth, incredible. I could name a few who weren't. Carlos Reutemann and Nigel were very, very good as well. But I can name a few who were not good on gear changing. So it just was a differentiator between some drivers or others, which does not exist today. That is my point. I'm not saying it was difficult. I'm just saying we just don't know how Max would have been as a gear changer. I mean, Ronnie Peterson and Jackie Stewart in their early days were pretty hard on dog rings and gearboxes. And Mario never was, for example. Peter Revson was very good on gear changing. You know, Peter Gethin wasn't. I don't think he was quite as good from memory. And so it goes on. So that was point. What was the other point? There's a lot of talk about Senna being the best qualifier, but in the modern age, tyre management is key. Qualifying versus race setup. Yeah, I'm not sure you're right. I think they still have a qualifying setup, and they still have a new set of tyres, and they still go out and have to manage that set of tyres over the lap. I mean, Mika Häkkinen famously got the pole at Monaco by not being particularly quick in Sector 1 at Monaco. But that's going back to what, 1998, 99, 2000? So that sort of having to manage the tyres over the lap has been around a long time. And it's all part and parcel of being a very good, great Grand Prix driver and knowing how to do it. And if you want to be quick in all three sectors, knowing how to do that, where you can just back off slightly in order to make sure you've still got tyres that are half reasonable for Sector 2, as indeed Max did in Austin. So I'm not quite sure the point you're making there. I think time management's always been key on a qualifying lap. James Hunt, another very good use of tyres on a qualifying lap, 1976. Very, very good. Denny Hulme as well, to the point where he could run different compounds on different corners of the car when you're allowed to do that in qualifying. So, yeah. Brian McClendon, 5289. Peter, your favourite coffee drink? Well, thanks for asking that one. I always go on about coffee when I'm doing the description for some of my podcasts, because it is a nice thing, isn't it? The whole coffee culture thing was something that when I came to England I never even thought about, because it didn't exist. But I do remember there was a time, I guess it must have been the early 80s probably. I did two things. Things were going quite well for me in Autocar, owned by IPC, big magazine. And I thought what I'd really love to do, in addition to continue running for Autocar, is persuade IPC to do a general sports magazine like Sports Illustrated, which would also include some fashion and road cars, a little bit of music, but basically would be would be all the major sports with a bit of Formula One, as the way Sports Illustrated were doing it at the time. 2 pages on the US Grand Prix, 5 pages on baseball or whatever the big sport was in America at the time, golf, etc. And I wanted to do the golf, the tennis, and the Formula One, obviously. And it went quite far to the IPC board, and they said, nah, we don't think a sort of men's interest leisure type magazine like this would ever work. The Sunday colour supplements cover that audience. They don't need another magazine. There's no market for another magazine. And about 3 years later, FHM and all the other big passion magazines all started and were all massively successful. IPC missed the boat there. And then I remember chatting, who was it with? I don't know who I was talking to. I think it might have been with Sheridan at Williams at one point. And I said, I love the way. That's right. I've been running with a mate of mine in Newport, California, and it was somewhere near the first ever Starbucks. And we stopped afterwards and had a Starbucks. And everyone was sitting around, with trying to just relaxing. There was great music and everyone was just having a coffee. And I thought, wow, this is great. There was the marina outside. And I remember saying to Sheridan after that, back in England, in Didcot, in the pouring rain, I said, it's a shame that we don't have that sort of coffee culture in England, because it's a climate that would actually work for coffee culture, because you go in there and it feel quite cozy, and you're in the warm drinking your coffee, and maybe you're doing a bit of work, reading, whatever, and it's raining outside. And he said, oh no, that will never work. The English only drink tea. I thought, oh well, yeah, he's probably right there. And then the coffee culture exploded. And so I guess he missed out on both of those with his creative thinking. But so anyway, I've always loved that idea of, and I have to say, towards the end of my writing career, I'm not saying I've given up writing completely, but when I started to do more television and everything, I did less and less writing. Towards the end of my writing, I used to literally just take my laptop to a Starbucks and write everything in a Starbucks, because I found it was a lot easier to have a coffee there and a few people around and a bit of music. It just didn't feel as much like hard work, I suppose, was the main thing. And so I've always loved that whole thing. Anyway, getting to the point, I think it depends on the time of year. I think in winter, in the evening, there's a lot to be said for a pumpkin spice latte, or even what they have here, a lavender spice latte. But in the morning, I would just go for a skinny, normal latte. I never have sugar, but I know that the syrup and the other stuff has sugar, so that's an indulgence, and I don't do it very often. But if it's just a normal latte, I'd never have sugar with it. Skinny latte, preferably grande, but not the big one. I don't mind the small one either. And that's it, really. It's simple. I would never go for, occasionally cappuccino, but I don't have to go through the rigmarole, no chocolate, please, and no this, because they always overdo it with the cappuccino. So I just think the latte is a great drink. I've started drinking a little bit of espresso here in Spain, but it's not quite the same. And there aren't many Starbucks here, that's the problem. And so getting a proper latte of the type that you're used to, or I'm used to, is not easy at all. It's a big thing. And to go to my nearest Starbucks is like a sort of half-hour drive from here, which I think for some Americans is no big deal. I think a lot of them do that, don't they? They just drive endlessly to go to shopping malls, and they do that. Yeah, big deal, Peter. But for me, I'm used to just walking up the road in London, and there's 9 Starbucks to choose from. Not anymore. I think they're all closing down, aren't they? Which is a shame. So there you go. Thanks for the question. And it's an important part of life, I think, that whole coffee culture thing. Shankarora 8117. Do you think Leclerc should have been made to give the place back to Lewis following the turn 1 incident? Difficult to understand how it wasn't even reviewed by the stewards. Well, not really, no. I think that turn 1 thing, maybe I've become blasé, but I think they did the right thing just to classify it as a turn 1 incident. But the only person I would have penalised, as I said, is Leclerc. So maybe what you're saying I agree with. I think more that's what should have happened. I don't think Leclerc, you could ever expect him to give that position back to Lewis, but I think if they'd given a penalty to Leclerc at that point for edging out Max and basically making it impossible, I think I would have lived with that. But I still think Max should have got a penalty for that thing with Russell anyway. Giving place back, penalties, the whole thing is such an annoying conversation, isn't it? And it's all because of these circuits with so much runoff area. The Patsev, hi Peter, would you accept commentating the races for some media? I'd love to hear you during the races and even live from track asking drivers interesting questions. Well, I don't think anyone would employ me to ask their drivers live questions because they'd be too annoyed with the questions, I would imagine. And I think there's an issue, isn't there, with, and I mentioned this before, I mean, these watch-alongs, I've been told by F1 are illegal because they breach the live rights of the rights holders for those countries, those regions, and don't even think about doing them. Of course, there's a grey area, and if you do it like a minute after live, you're a minute delayed, and you're just giving an opinion rather than commentating on what you're doing, you'll probably get away with it. But because I'm known by all the Formula One, by the Formula One TV people, and I'm known by the Formula One people, I guess, because I've been around for a while, then I'm playing with fire if I do that. Lots of younger people can get away with it because they're probably below the radar. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I just mean because they're younger, they're not as known by the older guys. But in my case, I am, and it's probably a thing around my neck, but I'm a bit nervous about doing it because, you know, they could take action. I don't know. I'm still thinking it through. People say, oh, don't be ridiculous, Peter, get on with it. But I don't know. Max 790, Peter, M. Hughes has been criticised for saying as brilliant as Prost was, he would put Mansell ahead in terms of ability. He said they had the same style, Nigel being quicker with brilliant racecraft. Well, I would agree with M. Hughes there, absolutely. And I'm good on him for saying that because not many people do give Nigel that amount of status, and I certainly would, and I've often said that. I think Nigel was as quick, if not quicker than Senna. And I say if not quicker, I think there were areas where Senna was slightly better than Nigel, and I think there are areas where Nigel was slightly better than Senna. Senna took longer corners than Nigel, and he definitely made more of a fuss about throttle application than Nigel. And Nigel was as supple as Senna. Maybe Senna was better on change of direction, chicanes, use of curbs. I think that's where Senna was really good. Not saying Nigel wasn't, but I suspect Senna could keep it up for longer, not making any errors. Fast corners, very little between them. TrackCraft, I would say, going back to Prost, obviously Nigel definitely ahead of Prost there. And I thought it was quite interesting. And I may have misread it and I didn't go through all the stuff, but it was quite interesting, wasn't it? I think it was Hadjar had on his helmet something like Mexico 1990, Prost P12 to P1 or something. And I remember thinking, it's odd that that's what he thinks was the highlight of the race, because the highlight of that race was Nigel passing Berger on the outside of Piratella. It wasn't Prost winning it, as shown by the reaction of the entire pit lane when Nigel drove back into the pits at the end of the race, and they're all looking up at Nigel. Nobody was looking at Prost. That was, and if Hadjar had said Mexico 1990, Mansell passes Berger outside Piratella, ! Then I would have thought, yes, this guy's on it. But the Prost wins, not something I necessarily remember from that race. I suppose it was, yeah, it was pretty good. But the Nigel thing was so good that, you know, who could have not have, this was 1990 Mexico. Yeah. Maybe I misread it on his thing. So apologies, Isaac, if I got that bit wrong. Weber, this is Anvil35, says Weber 2010, Australian fans have seen this all before. Of course they're upset. Well, yeah, you know, and I'm sure Mark is feeling deep down inside, if not saying it verbally, maybe he is, I don't know, that what Oscar's going through is what he went through at Red Bull with Vettel. And he's probably giving Oscar good advice based on lessons he learnt in that situation. Doesn't appear to be paying off at the moment, but I guess going into the last 4 races, it might be different. As I say, my advice would be don't listen to anything other than your own inner self. Enjoy your racing, enjoy every lap, get out there, have fun, and be that very sensitive, wonderful, supple driver who's got great coordination of input, speed that you were at the start of the year. And go on and get on with it. That's what I would say. Chowdhury again, Colin Cowdhury. This might be controversial, but will you swap Lewis with Behrman and Alonso with Lewis once Alonso retires, say at the end of 26? Well, that wouldn't be bad, would it? I'd love to see Oliver in and works Ferrari alongside Charles Leclerc. I think he'd do a really good job. Perfect teammate for Leclerc as well, I think. Lewis, what was I saying? Alonso retires, say at the end of 86, and you put Lewis in the car. Yeah, that wouldn't be bad either, would it? Adrian Newey and all that. Andy Cowell back again with Lewis. Yeah, it'd be good. If Lewis still wants to race in 27, I'm not sure he will, would he? But maybe he will. And if he's fit and hungry and wants to do that, that's not a bad thing, you know. Has a year off, thinks about his career. Yeah, I really want to race again. Comes back with a bang with Adrian Newey and Andy Cowell, Lewis Hamilton winning that elusive 8th World Championship. That would be cool, wouldn't it? Mind you, it'd be quite difficult getting Alonso out of the car, wouldn't it? Because he's for sure going to win Grand Prix next year. If not, maybe the World Championship. So if that happens, why is he going to want to leave at the end of 26? He's getting younger, Alonso, every day, as far as I can see. There's no sign of age at all, really. Hi, Peter. What's your Brazil prediction? Oof. Max Verstappen from Oscar Piastri, from Lewis Hamilton. Famous last words will come back to bite me, kill me, exterminate me. Anvil 35. If Lando wins the Drivers' Championship in a contentious way, and with the Ashes coming up, Norris might receive a very frosty reception at Albert Park. He might receive a frosty reception if he goes to the MCG on Boxing Day as well, I would have thought. our guest of honour to do the coin, well, up there with the English captain to join him on the flip of the coin is Lando Norris. Imagine what would happen at Bay 13 MCG. Yeah, well, I don't think Lando's worried about that, is he? He'll stay in friendly places. He'll spend his winter in the Sky TV studios in London probably, and if not, on a beach somewhere. Good luck to him. Will he win it in a contentious way? Imagine if there's an Abu Dhabi 21 and Oscar's leading, and at the last minute, McLaren unaccountably bring him in for a new set of tyres, and then Lando, then the safety car comes out, and Lando wins under the safety car. Yeah, well, there you go. I'm sure Zach's got all that covered. It's all ready. The Zach master plan. I'm not sure I put that last one up anyway. I'm sorry if I didn't. It's a good question, that one about the MCG, if it was indeed about the MCG. De Gea, 1F1 YouTube, compromise either car is dangerous, so won't do it. Yeah, well, they won't do it. They're talking to others, amongst yourselves. You don't compromise cars in Formula 1. I totally agree with that. HD Loan 17167. Lando won by 30 seconds. Is there no point in modern Formula 1 to not overstress your engine, especially when you don't have to? It's also at altitude. He already has one blown engine. Well, it's a good point. I can't imagine that he was doing anything other than pussyfooting and taking it very easy and not stressing the engine at all. I mean, I'm sure there's enough engineers at McLaren to have said that to him. And so I wasn't actually listening to his radio very much, so I can't tell you. But it looks like a big gap. But don't forget, everybody apart from Charles and Max were on two-stop strategies. So that gap was accentuated by them all having to come into the pits towards the end of the race, which suddenly expanded the lead of Lando on track. So it wasn't as, 30 seconds wasn't as dramatic as it appears. And then beyond that, he had a trouble-free race. He could look after his tyres. He could lift and coast throughout and just be very soft on everything. So I don't think he overstressed the engine. I find it astonishing that he would have. Lucas 12891. Hi, Peter. Who is more talented, Lewis or Max? For me, it's Lewis. But what is your opinion? I think right now, it depends what you mean by talent. Do you mean who was given by God the greatest dose of natural talent? Or do you mean who has done the best job of honing the dose of natural talent they were given into something that is maximizing the talent in every respect? Or do you mean the driver with the most natural talent who also has had the best possible environment an arena on which to use that talent. It's very difficult just to say natural talent without breaking it down to those three, and there's probably more descriptions. So I think Max has made absolutely perfect use of the natural talent that he has, with a very, very clinical and uncluttered approach to driving and to trackcraft. I think the same can be said of Lewis up until he became world champion for about the fourth time, when he became, because of who he is, because of his background, and because of the way he grew with social media and media in general, and because of his love of movies and show business in America, I think at that point his ability to hone his natural talent became less than Max's. And then after Abu Dhabi 21, I don't think he had the resilience anymore to remain the owner of that natural talent and the what's the right word? The owner of that natural talent, and just to use it correctly. It became affected by so many things as a result of Abu Dhabi 21. So I think he's became less of a driver then compared with Max. And so I think if you said right now, I would say Max because of that. I think Max has done a very good job of not becoming as big as he could be, and as distracted therefore as he could be. And so that's it. I think Lewis, everybody's different. Charles Leclerc's background and his team environment is very different. But you got to say, whatever, whether it's by luck or judgment, Max has perfectly used his talent in terms of its ability to grow, to be self-critical, and to get the best of every car he's ever driven, and to have great track craft, and to get the best from all the people he works with. It's not easy. And he's got this amazing talent. And it's all just perfectly put together. Even when he doesn't have the best car, he still maximizes everything he has. iRacing Aussie. G'day, mate. How are you? Hi, Peter. Love your stream. Thank you very much. Thank you. We are very lucky. What's the Rally of Sardinia like? And what is the island itself like when you've traveled there? Well, the Rally of Sardinia is unbelievably dusty. So make sure you stand on the inside and not the outside of a corner, or away from the prevailing wind. It's just like, you can barely breathe once one car's gone past, let alone 25. That's the first thing. We flew to Roma and then on to Sardinia, which was quite fun. And we had a nice room. It was one of those Airbnb things, but it was a roof terrace type apartment, which was quite nice, overlooking the harbour. That was quite nice. I found getting around to be a little bit disappointing. It was kind of, police everywhere and not much opportunity to have some fun. But one thing we did do, actually, we drove over a few of the stages, probably not allowed to do that beforehand, and didn't get into any trouble at all. So that was quite good. But I didn't find the thing to be quite as free and easy as I imagined it to be. I thought it would be a lot more open and a lot easier to get around. It wasn't that easy to get around, actually, from memory. Well, no, just not from memory. It just wasn't that easy to get around. But then again, my previous memory of Sardinia was doing it the right way. I did it with David Richards and Colin McRae. And Colin, at that point, wasn't driving. He had his own helicopter. And we were flying from vantage point to vantage point. And we were staying in an unbelievably nice hotel down in the south of the island when the rally was down in the south. And so I was a bit disappointed, I guess, with the one this year. But I was with Jack, and we did have a lot of fun with Terry Neuville and the boys. And generally, it was great. So, yeah, I'd recommend it. Bottom line, I would recommend it, yeah. I would recommend that over Monte Carlo, which I found really quite difficult to do. So many people. And access roads very poor, and controlling of the everything was quite bad. Portugal was good fun. Estonia was good. But the best rally of all, without a doubt, is the Rally of Finland. No question. Easy to get around. The whole city of, what's it called? I'll get it in a second. Jyväskylä is very involved in the rally. And everybody's friendly and nice. And the Finnish people are very cool. And so, yeah. If you're going to do one, do Finland. He says, sorry to ask a non-F1 question, but it's a pleasure. It's a real pleasure. And, you know, and rallying is part F1, isn't it? As I've said, you know, no surprise that Max was as good on the grass as he was. Look what his dad's doing at the moment. And equally, a lot of great Grand Prix drivers have been very good rally drivers. And so I got a lot of time for rallying. And it's just a way of getting a fix of seeing drivers doing things that you can't see them doing in a Grand Prix car because it's all concealed by everything in Formula One. But in a rally car, you see this unbelievable car positioning and car control, and I love seeing that. There's not many categories of racing now where you see the cars moving around that much. And I still laugh when I did that stage with Terry Neuville in Finland, and before the stage had started, we were just warming up. He was warming up the tyres and the brakes, and we're going down this public road, and there's cars coming towards us, and the stage entry's back behind us, and he's going away from the stage entry, and he's just going wow, wow, you know, throttle brakes, just getting the brakes hot. And then he realizes that he's running a bit late and has to get back. So there's a gap in the traffic coming towards us, and he just goes like that, and does a handbrake turn, blink, and you miss it, and you go back the other way. Perfect judgment. I love seeing great drivers doing things at slow speed, you know, that in the public arena. I mean, this wasn't a public road, it was just sort of the access road to the stage. But I love seeing them doing that and showing how much better they are than us mere mortals. I'd love to drive on the road with Max, actually. And guys like Oliver Burman, just see what he does in the road car, how he moves the car, how he brakes, how he, you know, how he looks for oncoming traffic or whatever it is. It's always fascinating to see that. This is talking amongst yourself, but they're saying probably Lewis, but Max will get past Lewis, 105 wins over the next 15 years if he stays. Well, we'll see what happens in 26. So, talking about grid penalties and engines on that one. Anvil35 says, Australians don't like being looked down on, especially from the UK. The frustration of Piastri fans to think something fishy is going on like Webber 2010 is understandable. Yeah, well, it is understandable. I'm not in any way saying it's not understandable. I'm just saying that I don't think there's anything fishy going on. And I think if Oscar had qualified better, he would have been in a position maybe to have run a different tyre strategy. But because he didn't qualify well, he was probably more in the hands of McLaren in telling him what tyre strategy to run. And that's a shame, because I think he should have run, you know, a better strategy. Neplitude. Peter, after Max's gritty P3 from Chaos, will RB21 upgrades make Brazil his sprint dominance to spark comeback? Or McLaren team tension gift him the final four? Well, as I say, I think he can win Brazil, all things being equal, which often they're not, in terms of luck and engine reliability and all the rest of it. But I think he can, and McLaren team tension. As I say, you know, from Oscar's point of view, he needs to race Max. From Lando's point of view, he needs to make sure he's in front of Oscar, really, I think, more than racing Max. And that will increase the tension at McLaren in his favour. Not the favouritism, but the tension. And so, yeah, I mean, if you've got two equal drivers in terms of both being super quick, and you've got a great Grand Prix car, championship winning car, as I've been saying from day one, it will always end in tears. And when they were not winning the championship together, nobody really worried. But I've always said, wait until it comes down to, you know, the witching hour, and if you've got two championship winning drivers in a championship winning car, it will end in tears for sure. And that's what presumably Zach Brown knew when he hired Oscar. And I'm still awaiting his master plan and how he's going to handle it. Yeah. Good luck with that, Peter. Bono Bronk. You're an encyclopedia of motorsports. Well, I'm not that. I do make mistakes. So how many Formula One drivers you know attending into WRC World Rally Championship and reverse the other way? Well, I mean, the classic example of the driver that could do both equally well, well, I would say Sterling Moss, for sure. Jim Clark, not far away. He won a lot of rallies before he got into Formula One, and when he went back into the rallying in '66, he was quick. Okay, he went off in the Lotus Cortina, but he was quick. He was right up there with the factory drivers. And more recent, and then '68, obviously Vic Elford, who won the Monte Carlo rally in the same year in which he finished 4th in the French Grand Prix. And that was his first ever Grand Prix race. And he didn't really do any Formula One testing before that. And it was wet. And he had an undrivable car, a Cooper BRM. So in terms of that, it's very difficult to think of anybody doing a better job than Vic Elford. And I mentioned this, I think, last live stream. Now, he's one of the most underrated Grand Prix drivers of all time, in my opinion. Who knows how good Vic Elford could have been had he, in '69, been given a factory Brabham or Lotus drive, for example. In recent times, Kimi Räikkönen didn't really do that well in rallying. I think Robert Kubica was probably quicker and in rallying and very, very fast in Formula One. So he was a standout. Kimi, full marks for trying, but I'm not sure I think Kimi's problem was not pace. It was more all the homework you got to do of working with the pace notes, developing them with the co-driver, all that stuff that Kimi, I imagine, was not really into. He just wanted to drive the car quickly. And yeah, I think it was more just the homework he had. I'm not sure Kimi would have been massively into changing wheels and all that stuff in the middle of the rain and the mud either. Probably not. Not because he's afraid to get his hands dirty. It's just not Kimi's thing, really, I would imagine. So I don't think that worked very well. I think I said at the time, I think if Terry Neville has the talent, had he become a racing driver, I think he would have been very, very good. I don't know how good. I think Ogier too, same thing. And I suspect, I'm more than suspect, I'm pretty confident that Kalle Rovanperä is going to be really good in single-seaters. He's young enough to make the transition now, and he's doing the right thing. He's going to Japan, where he'll feel very comfortable with Toyota behind him, and the team that Toyota get him into, and the way that team is run around him. I think it'll be a very, very comfortable first full season of racing for him. And then I think he's going to race for High Tech in Formula 2 in 27. Couldn't be a better environment as well in Formula 2. We all know Formula 2 can be iffy, and you can be very, very good and not get the results because of the way the whole championship is structured. But I don't think that'll be an issue for him because he will have Toyota behind him. And if he's quick in Formula 2, even if he doesn't win that many races, I think it's a short step away to putting him into a Toyota-backed Formula 1 team, whether that's Haas or maybe some other team at that point. So I think Kalle will do a very good job. And I think he's making the decision at exactly the right moment. And it's great to see. Really good to see. A guy with 2 world championships behind him, still young, all that natural talent, wanting to go into the absolute, jump into the volcano, into the lava, because he just wants to experience racing at the highest level. And Super Formula in Japan is mega competitive, incredibly difficult to do well there in terms of car setup, racing, the circuits, the weather, the travel, everything, the food, everything that he's not used to. He's used to the travel and the food, obviously, but I say the food because he's rallied for Toyota all these years. And so it'll be a seamless adjustment for him in that respect, but it won't be easy, but I think he'll do very well. I don't think he'll be crazy. I think he'll do it in a very systematic way. He's a very, very switched on guy. Got a lot of time for Kalle Rovanperä. Jazz Bono Bronx says F1. Yeah, okay. Jazz 365 on says, hey everyone, I love the stream and you'll see a racing wheel animation is really cool. Yeah, well, maybe we can get one of those. Yeah, it could do. Conservator, iRacing, Sardinia is great to visit. Okay, well, I haven't said it wasn't. I just preferred, if you're going to go to one rally as such, I mean, Sardinia is an island, of course. Why else would Patrick Head live there? He does, he loves it. I'm just talking about as a rally to go to. I would prefer to go to Finland, that's all I'm saying. Composer John says, hi Peter, do you have any tips on how to organize a racing event? I live in a rural area in Virginia, USA. There are many roads that would be incredible for rallying. Good drivers here too. That's interesting. I'm sure it's not that difficult in the sense that there's a pretty clear pro forma from the WRC in what you would need to conform with and to in order to stage a local rally. And I don't think those rules are that different. I went to a local rally here not so long ago. In fact, I'm going to one on Saturday down in Almeria. It's just a local rally, so I want to go down, just hear the sounds of 911 and a few other nice cars and watch them being driven hard over the gravel, and it's always fun. And obviously road closures, safety, there are some safety precautions, but generally speaking, where we were watching the other day, it was, where the HQ was the car park of a big shopping mall, and all the teams put up their tents, and that all worked really well. And the stages were all gravel, but not, there were walls here and sheer drops there, and none of it was an issue. You just went ahead and did it. So I can't imagine in America it would be that different, and it would be very difficult to do. So I would suggest you contact the WRC and say that you'd like to do this, and could they give you some advice on how to go about doing it. Obviously you need to get permission from the local council or whatever it is there to do that. Completely Lawless says, are short corner drivers able to do that because of a refined ability long corners drivers don't have, or can they be two equal styles? Well, in order to shorten your corners and have that incredible feel, it's all to do with the first half of the corner up to the rotation point. To have that ability, you've got to have incredible suppleness, and rates of input have to be perfectly matched to what the surface of the road is telling you. And that requires incredible sensitivity and balance, all the things we normally talk about, balance, reflexes, obviously, peripheral vision, all those things. But and even if you have that, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're always going to naturally feel that's the way to do a corner. But it'll mean that if you are thinking about your racing and you start to do that, like Jim Clark, I noticed I started to want to turn in earlier than most drivers. Your ability allows you to do that. On the other side of the coin, if that driver with that ability then wanted to just do nothing but late corner entries, break in a straight line, get the power on as soon as possible, he could do that with his eyes shut. That's basically what Lewis has been doing for quite a long time now, since 2022. But I don't think a driver like Liam Lawson or Carlos, the natural suppleness or rates of input that would be required in order to shorten the corner. I don't think it works the other way. I think it's that's a big jump. The rates of input jump is so big that it's as big as the gap you see sometimes between Isaac Hadjar and Liam Lawson. On circuits where it's not so, your ability isn't flattered as much as it is on other tracks, then obviously Liam Lawson's going to be very near an Isaac Hadjar because he's a quick racing driver. He can control a slide. He feels for the rear. He can brake late. He's got great car control up to the apex. He can get the power on in a really nice way. He can control the slide again. You can feel the bump, whatever. But what he's not able to do is go beyond that. He's always going to be driving at the limit of what that will allow him to do with the grip level he's got. What he can't do then is live with other factors like crosswind, change of track surface condition, overheating front brakes, overheating rear brakes, overheating front tires, graining left front, whatever it is, all the things that come into play. Those are the things that a driver with this innate suppleness and rates of input can manage through a bigger sweet spot of operation, because their general way of operating is through anticipation, not through reacting to what the car is doing, whereas Liam just reacts beautifully. And it's not only Liam, it's unfair to talk about him all the time, but he's a classic example of the current range of drivers. As is Colapinto, same thing. He drives the same way as Liam Lawson, and that's why he makes quite a lot of mistakes. And sometimes he's quick because he can get away with it, and he's got the soft tires perfect for that lap, no traffic, everything's working as it should. And then, of course, he's got lots of ability. But changed all the variables, and suddenly those guys aren't dancing with the music anymore. And that's the difference. So you'd always want to be, you always want to be supple. You always want to be soft and articulate in your movements. And you also want to be very, very coordinated in terms of your rates of input through your feet and your hands. Not easy. And there's no textbook, and there's no way of measuring that perfect coordination of rates of input. All you can do is watch an onboard and see how Max, even when he's fighting a car, is basically looking as if everything's pretty stable and comfortable and making it look relatively easy. Whereas when Yuki Tsunoda is fighting a bad car, you can see it. You can see it on the steering straight away. And that's the difference between rates of input, of having that coordination of rates of input. Bangwin. Okay, Dagia F1 YouTube with a checkered flag. Yep, plug for you, no problem. Bangwin 1032. Since WCC is on the books for the year, I'm curious. How much of the dynamics shift in the garage for the rest of the season in general, not only for the papayas? All the best from Finland. I think you mean World Constructors' Championship is on the books for the year. I'm curious. How much of the dynamics shift in the garage for the rest of the season in general, not only for the papayas? All the best from Finland. I don't know. I think most teams from about race 3 were thinking McLaren are going to win the Constructors' Championship, so there's nothing new there, and it didn't really change any of the ways in which they operated. And as for McLaren, I don't think it's changed the way they operate. They've got their eyes set on 26 in terms of the car, and they're apportioning the budget in the way they would have from the start of the year. I don't think it's changed anything, to be honest. And that's it. Constructors' Championship. The Drivers' Championship is another story, and that's what people love, and that's what people are going to be interested in. Stefan Johnson says, Albon, what's going on there? He seems lost. Yeah, it's a good point, isn't it? He's a lot of, he's a pretty relaxed sort of guy. I thought he was. Pretty chill guy. And yet we hear a lot of shouting and screaming down the radio from Alex Albon now. I suspect it's a frustration of believing in the first third, if not half of the year, that he was at least as quick as Carlos, if not quicker. And suddenly Carlos is getting some good results, and it's coinciding with Albon having a lot of issues, and suddenly he's getting very emotional about not being able to show his true pace alongside Carlos Sainz. And he has got that true pace. I firmly believe he's as quick as Carlos Sainz. I think he's really there, but he's showing an emotional side of his character which I never really have seen before, which is not particularly encouraging, really. He needs to calm down, in my opinion. Plutonian 8. Hey, Peter, who do you think is the best driver in the last 708 years who never made it to Formula 1? Or do you mean 7/8? Not sure what to make of that one. Last 708 years is quite difficult, because that means the entire history of Grand Prix racing. I would say, if that's the case, I'd say Frank Matic, who was an Australian driver of my era, who was as quick, who had an unbelievable battle with Jim Clark in the 65 Lakeside 99 Tasman race, where they traded fastest lap over the entire race distance. Well, almost entire race distance. Frank had to make a pit stop early on and was actually a lap behind. But Jimmy was so impressed with Frank that they just kept racing together when Frank rejoined. And they shared the fastest lap of the race, I think, at 54.9 from memory. And so I would say Frank Matic. I really believe that if Frank Matic had been in a factory Brabham in the 60s, he would have won plenty of Grand Prix, maybe a World Championship. I think he was that good. Let me think of others. I mean, I don't think Brian Redman, I know he started Grand Prix and he's classified as a Grand Prix driver, and indeed he had a third place in the 68 Spanish Grand Prix, but I'd like to include him as a driver that we never saw the best of, like Vic Elford actually, and who would have been incredibly successful had he been in a championship winning Grand Prix team. Brian Redman, one of the most talented racing drivers I've ever seen, and I've driven with him in a 911, and I can tell you how talented that guy is still today. I mean, he makes Rust Bucket look fairly tame in terms of the angles he can get a car at. Don't forget Rust Bucket, he's probably the most talented driver, never even to start a World Rally Championship. If you haven't seen it, go to Rust Bucket Motorsport YouTube channel. It is just brilliant. His latest car that he's driving is some sort of Kia. I don't know what sort of Kia it is. And he's only driving, he said, because some mate gave it to him. And it's an automatic Kia, which he hates automatics, of course. And he's got the GoPro mounted. Well, you can never see him because obviously he doesn't want to show his face. But he drives this thing absolutely sideways. He rolls it twice, I think. No drama at all. And he comes to the conclusion it's the most boring car he's ever driven in his life because it's nothing but total understeer all the time, even though he has the tail out a lot. So Rust Bucket should definitely get a drive as well, I think. I don't know, who else should we talk about? Oh, there are so many. There are so many, actually. You know, I've been lucky enough to see, I'm trying to think of a guy that, well, I mean, Frank Maddich is the obvious one, but let's try and think of one relatively recently. Well, you know, Colton Herta is a third driver now for Cadillac, so that's a good thing. But, and I'd have to say, yeah, I would say Colton Herta at the moment is very, very talented, and I can't wait to see him in a Grand Prix car. I think, you know, he's definitely up there with drivers with lots of talent. I don't know. There's so many. I'm not going to go down it anymore. Frank Maddich is my man. If there's going to be any, it would be Frank Maddich. I would say, keep thinking of him, Uhlenhardt, who was the engineer behind the Mercedes Grand Prix success in the, well, certainly in the 50s, and to some extent, I think he was a young, maybe very young engineer in the, no, probably not in the 30s, I may be wrong. But anyway, he's there in the 50s, and he did a lot of test driving, and he was almost as quick as Fangio whenever he got in the car. So there's another bloke that was never given his correct due in Formula One. So I can't remember what his first name was. Uhlenhardt, began with a U anyway, the family name. So he was another. All these different eras. It's quite difficult to think, isn't it, of all these guys. Yeah, one driver I always thought was pretty quick, and he was never given a Grand Prix drive, was David Morgan, actually. He was very good in Formula 3, and he was, you know, shoestring. Formula 2, he won a race. He was very good, but never really had the chance. And what about Marcus Armstrong? You know, he and Liam Lawson were sort of tied at the hip for many years. And I once asked Ollie Oakes who he felt was quicker, and he said, "Oh, don't take me down that path." Very difficult to say. So how does he feel now? He's going okay in IndyCar, but I mean, here's Liam, Formula One star, and nobody talks about Marcus Armstrong anymore, do they? Plenty of, what about Fabio Lima? They go on, there's a name. Never got a chance to do anything. And Davide Valsecchi, another one. Both of them very good in Formula 2. Very good. Fabio Lima was really good. No chance. Nobody even took any interest in him whatsoever. Bit like Leo Fornaroli now. Speaking of which, I hope Leo wins it this year in Formula 2. I really do. Anyway, apologies to all those I haven't mentioned, but you know who you are. Jay's 8965. I'm going to have to make this the last one, guys, because Dexter's down here and he just looked up. Daddy, it's lunchtime. Daddy? Master, it's lunchtime. For those of you that are a bit appalled. Hi, Peter. Max was ahead of Lewis, turn 1 apex. Max was ahead of Lewis, turn 1 apex. By carrying so much speed, just kept within track, but ran Lewis off. This is why he made no attempt to relinquish at turn 4, holding inside and fighting Lewis on brakes. I don't know. Maybe. I think the turn 4 incident to which I'm referring is the one where he was going to give the position back to Lewis. Are you talking about that incident? Right, let's read that again. Max is ahead of Lewis, turn 1 apex. By carrying so much speed, just kept within track, but Lewis ran. Yes, that's why. Which is why he made no attempt to relinquish at turn 4, but he did. He did. He in my opinion, Max was trying to give the position back to Lewis at turn 4. It's exactly that was the whole trigger for the whole thing. And Lewis, meantime, outbraked himself down the outside. And Max was sort of waiting for him and suddenly realised what was going on, slowed down even more, and then took out, basically, George Russell. It was a very confusing thing. I think that's what happened. So there you go. So there we go. I'm going to have to, so many more questions, sorry. I'll do another live stream soon because I've got to go now. It's been 2 hours. Anyway, my voice is going. I'll have some more, courtesy of Mercedes, who make great drink bottles. And not bad cars, I suppose. So I'm going to finish with this one. And JT, interesting you didn't name Lewis Hamilton among the greats. I think I did. If you were listing all the drivers that I had to suddenly reel off the tongue about all the great drivers, and I didn't mention Lewis, so plenty of others as well I didn't mention probably. I probably didn't mention Jackie Stewart in there. I don't think I did. It was only just you know, me not mentioning him. Well, of course he is one of the great drivers of all time, no doubt about that whatsoever. Lewis Carl Hamilton. Anyway, big thanks to everybody. Big thanks to Jetcraft, OEM Exclusive, REC Watches, TrackNinja. Without their support, wouldn't have this channel. Please read for details of this wonderful book on Bob Gerard in the description below this video. Also, REC Watches details there as well. Indeed, all our friends, supporters are in that area below the video description. So many thanks for your questions and for all your comments as well, and putting me straight on a lot of areas. It's been a lot of fun, as I knew it would be. We'll do another live stream soon. Thanks for watching. Take care.